Ava Mitchell walked through the crowded terminal of JFK Airport, her black carry-on gliding effortlessly behind her. The rhythmic sound of her heels tapping against the polished floors was drowned out by the hum of overhead announcements and the chatter of travelers rushing to their gates. She had just wrapped up an exhausting work trip overseas and was eager to get home. She adjusted the strap of her leather tote bag, double-checking that her passport and boarding pass were still inside. First class, seat 2A. She had worked hard to earn this. There was nothing special about this flight. At least, that's what she thought. But she had long learned that for people like her, even the most routine moments could turn into something else entirely. As she neared the boarding area, she spotted the check-in counter where the first-class passengers were lining up. A flight attendant stood near the entrance, scanning tickets with mechanical efficiency. Tall, blonde, and exuding an air of quiet authority, the woman barely looked at each passenger as she nodded them through. Ava exhaled slowly, preparing herself for the routine interactions that often came with traveling alone as a black woman in luxury spaces. She wasn't naive. She had seen the lingering stares, the questioning glances, the silent doubts that people held but rarely voiced. She reached the front of the line and handed over her boarding pass and passport. The flight attendant barely glanced up until her fingers touched the documents. That was when her eyes flickered to Ava's name, and something in her face shifted. Tiffany Reynolds. That was the name on the woman's neatly pinned name tag. Ava didn't recognize her, but the look Tiffany gave her was all too familiar. Tiffany scanned the ticket, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Miss Mitchell," she said slowly, her tone shifting from neutral professionalism to something more scrutinizing. "This ticket isn't in the system." Ava blinked. "That's impossible. I checked in online just an hour ago." Tiffany didn't budge. "The system says it's invalid." Ava held her gaze, refusing to shrink under the weight of Tiffany's stare. "Then check again." Tiffany hesitated, her fingers moving deliberately over the keyboard. The line behind Ava was growing, the impatience of other passengers becoming more audible. Ava's pulse remained steady, but inside irritation was bubbling. She had been in situations like this before. It was never about the system. It was about perception. "Is there a problem here?" A deep voice cut through the air. Ava turned her head slightly to see a middle-aged white man in a tailored gray suit standing behind her. Mark Davidson, CEO of some tech company. At least, that's what Ava assumed from the way he carried himself. He glanced at Ava briefly before shifting his focus to Tiffany. "No problem at all, sir," Tiffany said quickly, her demeanor changing almost instantly. She scanned Mark's ticket and waved him through without a second glance. Ava's fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. Tiffany turned back to her, her expression neutral again, as if the last few moments hadn't happened. "I'll need to verify your passport," she said. Ava's jaw tensed, but she remained composed. She had traveled internationally enough times to know that this wasn't standard protocol. But she also knew that making a scene wouldn't help her case. She pulled her passport from her bag and handed it over. Tiffany took it, flipping through the pages with deliberate slowness. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Finally, Tiffany sighed. "Wait here." Without another word, she walked away, Ava's passport still in her hands. Ava's stomach tightened. Something about this felt wrong. She turned to the next available flight attendant, a younger man with nervous eyes. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her voice even. "Can you tell me why my passport is being taken away?" The young attendant hesitated. He glanced toward where Tiffany had disappeared before shifting uncomfortably. I'm not sure. Let me check with her." Ava nodded, but the unease in her gut only deepened. She glanced around, noticing that several passengers had begun watching the exchange. Some were subtly recording on their phones. She wasn't sure whether it was because they sensed something was wrong or if they just wanted to catch a viral moment. Either way, she refused to let this unravel in a way she couldn't control. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. Ava exhaled sharply and rolled her shoulders, preparing herself for whatever was about to happen next. And then Tiffany returned. But this time she was holding Ava's passport differently, one hand gripping each side of the small navy book. Before Ava could speak, before she could demand an explanation, Tiffany tore the passport straight down the middle. The sound was sharp, the kind that sliced through the busy noise of the terminal, forcing heads to turn. Ava's breath caught. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. The torn halves of her passport dangled from Tiffany's fingers for a moment, before she tossed them onto the counter like they were nothing more than scraps of paper. Passengers gasped. A woman clasped her hands over her mouth. Someone in the back muttered, "What the hell just happened?" Ava didn't move. She didn't blink. Tiffany exhaled as if she had just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. "Fake passports are a security risk," she muttered, her voice flat. Ava's fingers trembled. That was her identity. That was her proof of who she was. Now it was nothing but torn paper at the feet of a woman who had decided she didn't belong. The terminal went silent. Then, in a voice stronger than even she expected, Ava spoke. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Ava's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at the torn remnants of her passport lying on the counter like discarded trash. The sheer audacity of what had just happened left her momentarily speechless. Around her, passengers whispered in hushed disbelief, some pulling out their phones to record. Her throat was dry, but she forced herself to speak. "You just destroyed my passport," she said, her voice dangerously steady. Tiffany remained unfazed, crossing her arms as if she had done nothing out of the ordinary. "Like I said, fake passports are a security risk. We can't allow potential frauds on international flights." Ava clenched her jaw, suppressing the wave of rage threatening to boil over. She had spent her entire life navigating spaces where she had to be careful about how she reacted, knowing that the slightest outburst could be twisted against her. But this was beyond anything she had experienced before. A young mother in line gasped. "She had a real passport. I saw it before you took it." A middle-aged man a few rows back shook his head. "This is insane. That's a federal document. You can't just rip it up." Tiffany turned to them sharply. "I suggest you all mind your business before you find yourselves in a similar situation." Ava took a slow breath, her nails digging into her palm. "I need to speak to your supervisor. Now." Tiffany's lips curled in a smirk, but before she could answer, a hesitant voice interrupted. "I can call the supervisor." Ava turned to see Ethan Carter, the younger flight attendant she had spoken to earlier. His face was pale, his posture uncertain, but there was something in his expression. Hesitation, maybe even guilt. He looked between Tiffany and Ava, clearly realizing he was caught in the middle of something much bigger than a routine boarding process. Tiffany shot him a look that could have burned through steel. "That won't be necessary. I already handled the situation." Ethan swallowed hard but didn't move. Ava, recognizing an opportunity, leaned in slightly. "Handled? You just destroyed an official government document in front of multiple witnesses. I doubt the airline would consider that handling anything." For the first time, Tiffany's confidence wavered just a fraction. She exhaled sharply, trying to regain control of the situation. "Miss Mitchell, I suggest you step aside while we sort this out." Ava didn't budge. "I'm not going anywhere until I speak to your supervisor." Tiffany glared at her, nostrils flaring. But before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" All eyes turned to a tall, middle-aged black woman in a sharply pressed airline uniform approaching from the main terminal entrance. The name tag on her blazer read, "Olivia Carter, Senior Flight Supervisor." Ava saw Tiffany stiffen, her shoulders squaring as if preparing for battle. Olivia's eyes swept over the scene, lingering on the torn passport on the counter before shifting to Ava. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes sharpened. "Miss Mitchell, can you tell me what happened?" Ava wasted no time. "Your flight attendant just accused me of having a fake passport and destroyed it in front of everyone." Olivia's gaze snapped to Tiffany. "Is this true?" Tiffany's confidence wavered, but she held her ground. "The document was questionable. I was following security protocols." Olivia folded her arms. "And who authorized you to destroy it?" Tiffany hesitated, her eyes darting to the side. You what?" Olivia pressed, her voice now laced with quiet authority. "Because as far as I know, no airline policy states that flight attendants are permitted to destroy passenger documentation. That is not your call to make." Ava could see the color draining from Tiffany's face. I thought," Tiffany stammered. "You thought wrong," Olivia snapped. "Do you have any proof that Miss Mitchell's passport was fake?" Tiffany opened her mouth but hesitated. It didn't look right. The texture, Olivia cut her off with a raised hand. "That's enough." She turned back to Ava. "Do you have any other form of identification with you?" Ava reached into her tote and pulled out her driver's license. Olivia took it, inspecting it carefully before nodding. She turned back to Tiffany, her jaw set. "Miss Mitchell is a verified passenger, and you just destroyed her legally issued passport. Do you realize the severity of what you've done?" Tiffany's confidence crumbled completely. Save it," Olivia said sharply. She turned to Ethan. "Get security here, now." Ethan, looking relieved that someone else was taking charge, nodded quickly and disappeared toward the front desk. Tiffany paled even more. "Wait, security? Olivia, come on, we can handle this internally." "No," Olivia said firmly. "You've gone far past that point." At that moment, 2 airport security officers approached. Their eyes scanned the tense scene before one of them, a tall, no-nonsense man with a badge reading Officer Daniels, spoke. "We received a report about an incident." Olivia turned to them, her voice even but commanding. "This flight attendant destroyed a passenger's passport under false pretenses." Officer Daniels frowned, glancing between Ava and Tiffany. "Is that true?" Ava took a breath. "Yes, and there are multiple witnesses." Murmurs of agreement echoed around them. Daniels turned to Tiffany. "Ma'am, do you have any authority to seize or destroy passports?" Tiffany swallowed, her hands clenching into fists. "I was just following protocol." "What protocol?" Daniels interrupted. "Because unless you work for Homeland Security, that's not your call to make." Tiffany flinched. Daniels exchanged a glance with his partner before looking back at her. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we investigate." Tiffany turned to Olivia, desperation creeping into her features. "You're really going to do this?" Olivia didn't flinch. "You did this to yourself." Daniels nodded toward the side of the terminal. "Come with us, ma'am." Tiffany hesitated, glancing around, but it was clear. She had no way out. Slowly she turned and followed the officers, her stiff posture barely masking the panic in her eyes. As she disappeared from view, a heavy silence settled over the terminal. Olivia turned back to Ava. "I am so sorry this happened. We will make this right." Ava nodded, exhaling for what felt like the first time in minutes. "I appreciate that." But she wasn't done yet, because if Tiffany thought this was over, she was dead wrong. Chapter 3. Ava sat in one of the stiff terminal chairs, her legs crossed, phone in hand, scrolling through emails, but her mind wasn't processing any of it. It had been nearly 30 minutes since Tiffany was escorted away by airport security, yet she still felt the tension knotted in her stomach. She exhaled slowly, glancing around. The energy in the terminal had shifted. People were still whispering, still throwing glances her way, but it was different now. Before, there had been skepticism, amusement even. Now there was awareness. A man in a navy blazer, maybe in his 50s, approached cautiously. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "I just want to say I saw what happened. That was unbelievable. You handled yourself with a lot of grace." Ava offered a tight smile. "Thank you." "Did they say what's going to happen next?" he asked. Before she could answer, a woman in a beige trench coat sitting nearby added, "She needs to be fired. You can't just rip up someone's passport and walk away." Ava nodded in agreement, but her mind was already 2 steps ahead. She had been patient. She had kept her composure. But now it was time to escalate this. Her fingers hovered over her phone screen before she finally pressed the call button. The line rang once before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Ava?" Ava's shoulders relaxed just slightly at the sound of her husband's voice. "David," she said, "I need you to do something for me." David Mitchell was not just her husband. He was a high-ranking federal official, a man whose influence carried weight in circles that most people never even knew existed. His voice sharpened instantly. "What's wrong?" Ava didn't waste time. She laid everything out, her words clipped, efficient. By the time she finished, David's silence was deafening. Then came the controlled rage. "She did what?" "She tore it in half right in front of me," Ava confirmed, her voice steady. "Called it fake. Humiliated me in front of everyone. And now security has her, but that's not enough." "No, it's not," David agreed, his voice low and dangerous. "Stay where you are." Ava closed her eyes for a brief second. "I'm not going anywhere." As she hung up, she noticed Olivia Carter walking toward her, her expression unreadable. Ava tucked her phone away and stood to meet her. "We've started an internal report," Olivia said without preamble. "I've spoken with security. They're detaining Tiffany for further questioning, but I wanted to check on you first. Are you all right?" Ava studied her carefully. Olivia had been professional so far, but something in her tone had changed. There was an edge to it now, something heavier. "I'll be fine," Ava said, "once I get an official apology and my passport situation resolved." Olivia nodded, glancing down at the counter where the torn document still lay like a crime scene. "We're working on that now. I've already contacted Homeland Security. You'll be issued an emergency passport replacement." Ava arched a brow. "That fast?" Olivia hesitated for just a second before saying, "Let's just say, you're not the only one making calls today." Ava's gaze sharpened. "Meaning?" Olivia sighed. "Meaning that people higher up are already aware of what happened, and they are not happy." Before Ava could respond, a commotion near the entrance of the terminal caught her attention. A group of uniformed men strode through the glass doors with unmistakable authority. Leading them was a tall black man in an immaculate suit, his sharp gaze scanning the room. David. Ava felt a shift in the air as heads turned, passengers murmuring at the sudden arrival of a federal agent in the middle of an airport terminal. He walked toward her, his stride purposeful, eyes locking onto hers first, scanning her for any sign of distress. Then his attention flicked to Olivia. "Are you the supervisor in charge?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Olivia nodded. "Yes, Olivia Carter, Senior Flight Supervisor." David didn't waste time. "I need to speak with airport security and whoever is handling the internal review. Now." Olivia exhaled but nodded, motioning for him to follow her. David turned back to Ava, his voice gentler. "I'll take care of this." "I know," she said, squeezing his hand briefly before he followed Olivia. Ava returned to her seat, her mind still racing. The situation was moving faster than she expected, and now the stakes were higher. Minutes later, David emerged from the back office, his jaw tight, expression unreadable. "Well?" Ava asked. She's being questioned, he said. But there's more. Apparently, this isn't the first complaint against her. Ava's stomach twisted. What do you mean? David's expression darkened. She has a history, other passengers, other employees. But none of it ever reached public attention because it was handled quietly. Ava felt a fresh wave of anger rise. Of course it was. David nodded toward the terminal windows, where the evening sky was beginning to dim. But not this time. Ava followed his gaze, her mind already working through her next move. Because this time she wasn't just a passenger dealing with a bad flight attendant. This time she was going to make sure the entire world knew exactly who Tiffany Reynolds was. Ava sat in the terminal lounge, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her chair. The weight of what had happened still pressed against her chest. But it was no longer just about her. It was about all the other people Tiffany had mistreated. David stood a few feet away, speaking in hushed tones with a Homeland Security officer. His posture was tense, his jaw locked in quiet rage. Ava knew her husband well enough to recognize that he was holding back. She wasn't the only one watching. Passengers, airline staff, and security officers were all stealing glances, their curiosity barely concealed. News of what had happened had spread like wildfire, and though no one dared to say it out loud, Ava could feel the weight of their silent questions. Was she really going to let this go? The answer was clear. Not a chance. A sharp voice cut through the low hum of conversation. "This is outrageous!" Ava turned her head just in time to see Tiffany storming back into the terminal, flanked by two airline lawyers. Her face was red, her eyes blazing. Gone was the smug confidence from earlier. Now she was furious. "You can't detain me like some criminal," Tiffany snapped, her voice rising. "I was doing my job. I had every right to question that passport." The Homeland Security officer, a no-nonsense woman named Agent Ramirez, raised a brow. "And where, exactly, in your job description does it say you're allowed to destroy a government-issued document?" Tiffany opened her mouth, then clamped it shut. For the first time, she had no answer. David took a step forward, his voice calm but sharp. "Let me be clear, Miss Reynolds. You not only destroyed my wife's passport, but you did so without just cause. That is a federal offense." Tiffany's face paled slightly, but she lifted her chin. "It was fake. I was trying to prevent a security risk." Ramirez folded her arms. "We've already confirmed that her passport was real." Tiffany flinched. "And," Olivia Carter added, stepping forward, "we've pulled your personnel file." The room seemed to still. Tiffany shot Olivia a glare. "What are you talking about?" Olivia held up a thick folder, flipping it open. "Multiple complaints, accusations of racial bias, reports of mistreatment toward passengers of color." She looked up, her gaze sharp. "You have a pattern, Ms. Reynolds." Ava felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the moment the truth came out. Tiffany scoffed. "That's ridiculous. If that were true, I would have been fired already." "The only reason you weren't," David said coolly, "was because the complaints were always handled quietly, swept under the rug. But this," he gestured toward the cameras that were now pointed in their direction, "this isn't going away." Tiffany's expression flickered. She knew it too. Olivia continued, flipping another page. "You called a black flight attendant unprofessional and pushed for her termination, even though passengers had nothing but positive reviews about her service. That's not. You accused an Asian passenger of tampering with their boarding pass, forcing them to miss their flight, only for the airline to later confirm the ticket was perfectly valid." Tiffany's fists clenched. "That was a mistake. You tried to have a Latino family removed from a flight because their child was too loud, despite the fact that other white families with children were making just as much noise." Tiffany's mouth snapped shut. The silence was suffocating. Ava could see it happening. the realization dawning on Tiffany's face, the weight of her actions catching up to her in real time. Then, finally, Tiffany did what Ava had expected her to do all along. She lashed out. "You're all against me," Tiffany shouted, her voice shrill. "This is a setup. You're trying to ruin my career over one mistake." Ava stood. Enough was enough. She locked eyes with Tiffany, and for the first time let every ounce of power and confidence she had come forward. One mistake? Ava's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. "You humiliated me in front of a plane full of people. You ripped up my passport, my identity, like it was garbage. You accused me of fraud for no reason other than the fact that you saw a black woman in first class and decided I didn't belong." Tiffany's breathing was uneven. Ava took a slow step forward. "And the worst part," she continued, "this isn't even about me. You've been doing this for years. You've ruined people's flights. You've jeopardized their travel. You've played judge and jury with their experiences, and now, finally, you're facing the consequences." Tiffany shook her head. "That's not true," Ava cut her off. "You want to talk about ruining careers? Let's talk about the flight attendant you got fired. The families you humiliated, the people you made feel like they didn't belong." She took another step, her voice unwavering. "This is justice, Tiffany, and you deserve every bit of it." Tiffany went silent. For the first time, there was fear in her eyes. Agent Ramirez sighed, looking unimpressed. "Ms. Reynolds, we're officially recommending that your employment be terminated effective immediately." Tiffany's head whipped toward Olivia. "You can't." "I already did," Olivia said simply. Tiffany staggered back as if she had been physically struck. David stepped in. "And since destroying a passport is a federal crime, you will be escorted off the premises. Further charges will be at the discretion of the authorities." Tiffany's entire body froze. Security stepped forward. "No, no, no, this isn't happening." Her protests were cut off as the officers gently but firmly took her by the arms and led her away. Passengers watched in silence. Some whispered, some recorded, but no one stopped what was happening. Because justice had finally arrived. Ava inhaled deeply, watching as Tiffany disappeared down the hallway. It was over, or at least Tiffany's career was. But for Ava, this was just the beginning. Ava stood near the large terminal windows, her reflection staring back at her against the backdrop of planes taxiing on the runway. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the past hour was finally beginning to settle, but the fire in her chest was far from extinguished. Tiffany Reynolds was gone, fired and escorted out like the disgrace she was. But this fight wasn't over. She glanced at David, who was typing furiously on his phone a few feet away. Her husband was a man of action, and she knew that even now he was making calls, ensuring that Tiffany's actions would be permanently documented in the system. There was no coming back from this. "You okay?" David's voice was softer now, his sharpness reserved for the battles he was still fighting behind the scenes. Ava turned to him, letting out a slow breath. "I will be," she admitted. David tucked his phone into his pocket, his expression unreadable. "This story isn't going away. It's already spreading." Ava followed his gaze to the people in the terminal. The cameras were still rolling. People were whispering, some openly talking about what had just unfolded. And she knew this wasn't just a passing incident. It was a moment that people would talk about. A moment that might actually change something. And then the airport doors slid open. A group of reporters rushed inside, their cameras clicking, their microphones extended as they zeroed in on Ava. She tensed instinctively. She hadn't expected this. A young reporter with long, straight hair and a press badge pinned to her blazer was the first to approach. "Miss Mitchell," she called, her voice sharp and direct. "Do you have a moment to comment on what happened?" Ava hesitated. She wasn't afraid to speak. She had never been afraid to speak. But she also knew the power of words, how they could be twisted, how they could be used against her. David, ever the protector, started to step forward, but Ava lifted a hand to stop him. She could handle this. She turned fully toward the reporters, meeting their gazes head-on. "What do you want to know?" The reporters' eyes lit up at the invitation. "Can you confirm that a flight attendant wrongfully accused you of carrying a fake passport and then destroyed it in front of a crowd of witnesses?" Ava didn't flinch. "That's exactly what happened." The microphones pushed closer. Another reporter chimed in. "And do you believe this was racially motivated?" Ava took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I believe that Tiffany Reynolds has a pattern of targeting passengers of color, and today she felt emboldened enough to take it to an extreme. She thought she could get away with it. She was wrong." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. People were listening. The first reporter pressed on. "There are rumors that your husband is a federal official and was involved in her termination. Can you confirm that?" David finally spoke up, his voice measured but firm. "My position had nothing to do with this. The facts alone were enough to cost her her job." The reporters weren't satisfied. "Miss Mitchell, what do you want to happen next?" Ava paused. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of her expression. She knew that whatever she said now would become the headline. So she spoke the truth. "I want accountability," she said. "Not just for me, but for everyone Tiffany Reynolds has ever mistreated. For every person who has been humiliated, denied service, or treated as though they didn't belong. This isn't just about one flight attendant. It's about a system that allows people like her to act without consequences. And today, that system failed to protect me." A hush fell over the reporters. Then someone clapped. A slow, steady applause. Ava turned to see an older black woman standing near the check-in counter, nodding at her with quiet approval. Then another person joined in, and another, and suddenly the terminal was filled with applause. Ava blinked in surprise, feeling the shift. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a statement. The first reporter lowered her microphone, smiling slightly. "Thank you, Miss Mitchell." As the crowd began to disperse, Ava turned back to David, whose eyes were filled with something she rarely saw in him: pride. "You did that," he murmured. Ava exhaled, finally feeling the weight lift. "Yeah," she said, "I did." But as she looked at the sea of phones still recording, at the faces watching her, she realized something. This wasn't just a victory. This was the beginning of something bigger. Ava sat in the back of the black SUV, the city lights of Atlanta flashing past the tinted windows. The adrenaline from the past few hours had begun to wear off, but the fire inside her was still burning. She wasn't done. David sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. The tension in the air between them wasn't from disagreement. It was from the weight of what was happening. "This has gone national," David finally said, tilting the screen toward her. Ava glanced at the news article flashing on his phone. "Federal official's wife denied flight after flight attendant destroys her passport. Racial bias allegations spark outrage." She let out a slow breath. "Good." David studied her. "You ready for what comes next?" Ava turned to face him fully. "I was born ready." A small smirk played on his lips. "That's what I love about you." She leaned back, closing her eyes for a brief moment. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back into the storm. The text was from Olivia Carter, the senior flight supervisor who had helped her at the airport. "Call me ASAP. There's more you need to know." Ava's stomach tightened. "More?" She hit the call button immediately. Olivia picked up on the second ring. "Ava," Olivia said, her voice clipped but urgent. "I just got out of a meeting with the airline's legal team. You need to be prepared for what's coming. Ava sat up straighter. What's happening? They're trying to spin this, Olivia said. The airline is claiming that Tiffany acted independently and that they had no prior knowledge of her behavior. Ava's fingers curled into a fist. That's a lie. You showed me her personnel file. There were multiple complaints. Exactly, Olivia confirmed. But they're throwing her under the bus to protect themselves. If they admit they knew, it opens them up to lawsuits. And trust me, they're already bracing for a PR disaster. Ava exhaled sharply. She knew this was coming, but hearing it out loud still made her blood boil. They want to offer you a settlement, Olivia continued. David's head snapped toward Ava at the same time. She said, Absolutely not. Ava, listen to me, Olivia said, her voice dropping. I know you want justice. I know you want real change. But these people, they don't want change. They want this to go away, and they're willing to pay to make that happen. Ava glanced at David, whose expression had hardened. He was already anticipating her next move. How much? Ava asked. Olivia sighed. $500,000. David let out a low whistle. They're scared. Ava laughed without humor. If they're offering that much, it means they know they're guilty. They are guilty, Olivia said. But here's the thing, Ava. If you take the money, you'll have to sign an NDA. You won't be able to talk about any of this. Ever. Silence filled the car. David broke it first. They think you can be bought. Ava's jaw clenched. They don't know me very well. She turned her attention back to Olivia. I appreciate the call, but you already know my answer. A beat of silence. Then Olivia exhaled. I figured as much. Are you okay? Ava asked, her voice softening. You're taking a risk even calling me. Olivia hesitated. I'll be fine, but I want you to know I believe in what you're doing, and I'll help however I can. Ava felt a lump rise in her throat. In a world where people in power so often chose silence, Olivia had chosen courage. Thank you, Ava said. After they hung up, David turned to her. So what's next? Ava took a deep breath, her pulse steady. I go public. David nodded slowly, his eyes dark with approval. Let's make them regret ever thinking they could silence you. That night, Ava sat at the kitchen island in their apartment, her laptop open, the cursor blinking on a blank social media post. She had drafted 3 versions of what she wanted to say, but none of them felt quite right. She took a sip of her tea, inhaled deeply, and finally started typing. I wasn't going to speak on this publicly, but I don't have the luxury of silence. Yesterday, a flight attendant accused me of carrying a fake passport, humiliated me in front of a crowd, and then destroyed my legal documentation. This wasn't just an act of ignorance, it was an act of blatant discrimination. She paused, then kept typing. I have the privilege of a platform, of support, of resources to fight this. But what about the people who don't? What about the passengers who suffered in silence? The ones who were mistreated and ignored? How many Tiffany Reynolds are out there, abusing their power without consequence? The airline offered me money to stay quiet. I refused, because this isn't about money. It's about accountability. If you've ever been discriminated against in an airport, a plane, a hotel, anywhere where someone made you feel like you didn't belong, I want to hear your story. Let's make them listen. Accountability matters. Justice for all. She hovered over the post button for a second. Then, without hesitation, she clicked. Within minutes, the post exploded. The comments poured in faster than she could read them. This happened to my father last year, and the airline did nothing. I was pulled aside at TSA for random screening every time I traveled, even though I have TSA pre-check. Ava, thank you for speaking out. You have no idea how many people have experienced this. Her phone buzzed nonstop. She checked her notifications. Verified accounts were sharing her post, news anchors, activists, celebrities, people with real influence. And then her phone rang. It was Olivia. Ava answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "You did it," Olivia said, breathless. "The airline's board just called an emergency meeting. They're in full-blown panic mode." Ava swallowed the lump in her throat. "Good." "No," Olivia said. "You don't understand. This is bigger than just firing Tiffany. They're being pressured to issue a full public apology, to change policies. This is going all the way up." Ava gripped the phone, her heart pounding. For the first time since this all started, she realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated like they didn't belong. And she was winning. Ava stood in front of the large floor-to-ceiling windows of her apartment, staring out at the city skyline. The glow of Atlanta's lights stretched endlessly before her, but her mind was elsewhere. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing all day. News outlets were reaching out for interviews. Activist groups wanted her to speak at events. Lawyers had sent her messages offering pro bono representation in case the airline retaliated. And the airline? They were in crisis mode. She knew it the moment she saw their pathetic attempt at damage control. Ava clicked on the airline's official statement, reading it for what felt like the 100th time. "We take all allegations of misconduct seriously. We are conducting a thorough internal review to ensure our commitment to an inclusive and respectful environment for all passengers and employees. We regret any distress caused and will continue to work toward better serving our customers." Ava exhaled sharply. It was the classic corporate apology: empty words, vague promises, and zero accountability. David, sitting across the room, glanced up from his laptop. "You're reading it again, aren't you?" Ava tossed her phone on the couch. "It's insulting." David closed his laptop, leaning forward. "They're stalling. They're hoping this will die down in a few days." Ava scoffed. "Then they're underestimating me." A ding from her phone caught her attention. A new email. She picked it up, scanning the sender's name. Her eyes widened. Internal airline whistleblower. She immediately opened it, her heart racing. "Ava, I don't know if you'll see this, but I work for the airline. I've been following what happened to you, and I need you to know this isn't an isolated incident. There's a cover-up happening right now. They're scrambling to destroy evidence of past complaints against Tiffany Reynolds, and they're doing everything they can to protect senior executives who knew about her behavior but did nothing. I have proof. If you want it, respond to this email." Ava's pulse pounded. She lifted her head, locking eyes with David. "It's bigger than we thought." David's brows furrowed. "What happened?" Ava turned the phone screen toward him. He scanned the email quickly, his face darkening. "They're covering their tracks," he muttered. Ava's grip on the phone tightened. "They think they can erase this like it never happened." David studied her for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Ava didn't hesitate. "I want the proof." She typed a quick reply. "Send me everything you have." Confidentiality guaranteed. The response came within minutes. Ava opened the email attachment, her stomach twisting as she scrolled through the evidence. Internal emails between senior executives, complaint records dating back 3 years, passengers detailing the exact same mistreatment Ava endured. And the worst part? The airline had ignored all of it. Ava covered her mouth, her hands shaking. They let her keep her job, knowing exactly who she was. David's jaw was clenched, his anger barely contained. "They're complicit." Ava's mind raced. This was more than just a bad employee. This was systemic corruption. She grabbed her phone and hit record. She looked straight into the camera, her voice steady but sharp. "This is what happens when companies think they're untouchable, when they think they can silence people with money and fake apologies. But we're not staying silent." Not this time. She turned the screen, showing the damning emails and buried complaints. This is proof that they knew, that they protected someone who hurt people, who abused her power, and now they want to make this all disappear. She looked back at the camera. We won't let them. Ava ended the recording and immediately uploaded it. Within minutes, her phone exploded with notifications. People were furious. The comments came in faster than she could read. They knew. This is disgusting. This is why we need accountability. Boycott the airline until real action is taken. Then one comment stood out. It was from a former employee. I used to work for them. I have my own story to tell. And just like that, more people came forward. A flight attendant who had been bullied out of her job. A black pilot who had been denied a promotion despite being more qualified than his colleagues. A passenger who had been wrongfully removed from a flight based on a false complaint. The floodgates had opened. David stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. This isn't just your fight anymore. Ava nodded. It never was. Then her phone rang. She answered, already knowing who it was. Olivia Carter's voice was urgent. Ava, you need to get ready. The airline's board just called a press conference, and they're not in control anymore. You are. Ava took a deep breath, steeling herself. This wasn't just about what happened to her. This was about all the people who had been ignored, dismissed, and silenced. And for the first time, they were finally being heard. Chapter 8. Ava stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her blazer. The weight of everything she had fought for in the past few days sat heavy on her shoulders, but there was no fear in her eyes, only determination. David leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You don't have to do this if you're not ready. Ava turned to face him. I was ready the moment Tiffany tore my passport in half. David gave a small nod. He knew better than anyone that once Ava set her mind on something, she never backed down. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Olivia. They're live. It's starting. Ava inhaled sharply, then grabbed her bag. Let's go. The drive to the press conference was quiet, the city streets passing in a blur. Ava's mind raced, running through every possible scenario. The airline's board of executives had been forced into this situation. The public outcry had grown too loud to ignore. Now they had no choice but to answer for their actions. When they arrived at the venue, the scene was already chaotic. Reporters, activists, and former employees of the airline stood outside, holding signs, chanting, demanding change. Ava stepped out of the car, and instantly cameras turned toward her. People recognized her now. She wasn't just a passenger who had been wronged. She was a symbol of the fight for justice. David placed a reassuring hand on her back as they pushed through the crowd and entered the conference room. The airline's executives sat at a long table on the stage, microphones lined in front of them. Olivia was already inside, giving her a small nod of support from across the room. A hush fell over the audience as the airline's CEO, a stiff-looking man in a gray suit, leaned forward. He cleared his throat. Good afternoon. We want to address the events that have unfolded over the past several days, specifically regarding the incident involving one of our former employees, Tiffany Reynolds. Former. So they were finally admitting she was fired. The CEO continued, his voice carefully measured. We recognize that the actions of this individual were unacceptable, and we deeply regret the distress this has caused Ms. Mitchell and countless others. Ava narrowed her eyes. They weren't sorry about what happened. They were sorry they got caught. The CEO gestured toward a stack of documents. After conducting a thorough internal review, we have identified gaps in our training protocols and reporting procedures. Effective immediately, we will be implementing mandatory bias training, strengthening our accountability measures and establishing an independent oversight committee to ensure incidents like this never happen again. A murmur rippled through the room. It sounded good on paper, but Ava wasn't here for empty promises. She raised her hand. Ava Mitchell, question. The CEO's face tensed. He had been expecting her. Ms. Mitchell, he said, his voice tight. Please. Ava stepped forward, her voice steady, clear, and impossible to ignore. You're saying this was just an oversight? That Tiffany Reynolds acted alone? The CEO's lips pressed together. We acknowledge that previous complaints against Ms. Reynolds should have been handled differently. Ava didn't back down. Handled differently? You mean buried, ignored, erased? How many people filed complaints that you chose to silence? The CEO hesitated. Ava let that silence hang for a moment. Then she spoke the words that would define the moment. This isn't about one flight attendant. This is about a culture of discrimination and abuse of power that your company allowed to exist. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. The CEO shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Mitchell, we are making changes. Ava interrupted. You're making changes because you were forced to, because the world is watching. But tell me, what about the passengers who never got justice? The ones you dismissed, humiliated, and cast aside? What do you say to them? Silence. The CEO swallowed hard. We will do better. Ava held his gaze. Then prove it. She turned, looking out at the audience. Prove it to all of us. And then she stepped back. The conference erupted with questions, cameras flashing, journalists shouting over one another. The CEO was drowning, struggling for control. But Ava, she had already won. Later that evening, Ava sat on the balcony of her apartment, staring at the city skyline once more. This time she felt lighter. David joined her, placing a glass of wine in front of her. You did it. Ava smirked, taking a sip. We did it. Her phone buzzed. Another notification. Another message of support. Another person inspired to speak up. Because that was the real victory. This wasn't just about her fight. This was about every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And now, they knew they had a voice, and they weren't afraid to use it. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up for what's right, like, comment, and share. Because our voices have power, and together we can change the world.